Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast, here today with political commentator and media analyst Danny Seaman. If you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show so I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. I'm going to start off with what some people might find controversial, but it happens to be a fact. There is no Palestinian state. World leaders could say anything they want, but the fact is, you can't have a state without borders or a government. And the other fact is, the Palestinians have neither, and for good reason. The Arabs were actually offered a state by the UN in 1947 and 1948, but they rejected the partition plan outright because they refused to recognize a Jewish state. Later, this refusal would be codified in the Khartoum Declaration of 1967. No recognition of Israel, no peace with Israel, and no negotiations with Israel, aka the Jewish state. And so the stage was set. We can rewind centuries or even millennia to trace the roots of this belligerence and the violence that accompanied it. But instead, let's fast forward to 1993, the first of the Oslo Accords, when it finally seemed like peace may just become a possibility. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Today, Danny Seaman will explain the complexities of the Middle East conflict from Oslo to August 28th, 2025, and what recognition of a Palestinian state really means for the future of the region. Danny Seaman is a Jerusalem-based political commentator, media analyst, and advisor to the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, the IDSF. A 31-year veteran of government service, he retired in 2014 as Deputy Director of the Ministry of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs. Prior to that, he served for a decade as Director of the Government Press Office, coordinating with the foreign press on behalf of the Prime Minister's office. Danny also served as IDF spokesperson's liaison to the foreign press, receiving the Israeli Civil Service Outstanding Employee Award in the year 2000. Danny served his compulsory military service in the IDF between 1979 and 1982 in an elite paratrooper unit, and continued his service as a paratrooper in the reserves for 25 years thereafter. Danny is the host of Straight Up on JNS and the author of Israel and the Foreign Media, Examining Media Manipulation in Coverage of the Middle East. Danny, I've long been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, though I want to focus on post-Oslo Accords, it's difficult without giving at least some historical context. Of course, again, we could go back millennia. This is a conflict as old as time. But can you give the highlight reel of the evolution of the Palestinian, for lack of a better term, narrative from the British Mandate to Oslo?
Well, from the British Mandate, if you want to use that as a starting point, they didn't consider themselves Palestinians. I can testify to the fact that my mother was born in Jerusalem 90 years ago. She was considered Palestinian, as were all the Jews. The Arabs called themselves Arabs. Syrians considered it part of southern Syria. The Jordanians considered it part of Jordan, and areas and parts of it the Egyptians considered as well. Arabs who came here basically came at around the same time when Zionism returned. Mark Twain writes about the region and talks about the fact that it was malaria-ridden, there were swamps, nothing could grow around here. And as the Jews began returning, the place took a turn for the better, and it became very prosperous. And they needed workers, and Arabs from the Ottoman Empire started moving in here. Very easy to check who they were, because even today, when you see the last names of the Palestinians, as they call themselves now, last names can tell you exactly where they're from. El Masri, for example, which is very clear, is somebody from Egypt. You have Khorani, which is from an area in Syria. El Yemeni, which is from Yemen. So you have different, those are quite clear. Then you have other last names that are basically towns or regions or clans that people belong to. So this was what they were. With the end of the independence war for Israel, and as you mentioned, the Arabs did not accept the UN partition plan, which at that point was going to dedicate, which is their right, by the way. They're well within their right to refuse a UN resolution. What they did not have a right to do was attack Israel. And not only attack Israel, everybody today is very quick to wave the theme of genocide. They made it very clear that their goal is to genocide the Jews here. And when you look at a lot of the situation at the time, you had 7 Arab armies assaulting a very small Jewish community in the land of Israel. Initially, it seemed that they would be successful. But as time moved on, the Jews here were very successful in moving them out. And eventually, it took about a year and 7 months. They reached a armistice agreement. And Jordan sat on the area which they call the West Bank of Jordan, which is the Judea and Samaria. And most of the area, the rest of the area, Israel had taken over. Now, you had around 600,000 Arabs who weren't exactly expelled. They were asked by the Arabs to leave so it could be easier for them to attack the Jewish population. Story from my mother, as I said, lived in Jerusalem. There was a mixed neighborhood of Jews and Arabs who lived there for about 30 years together. And when it was clear that the Jews were taking over Jerusalem, they wanted to leave. And my grandfather, who was the head of the Afghan community, who had moved to Israel over 100 years ago, he said to them that, look, we live together. You have nothing to worry about. We'll take care of you. But they refused to accept that. And I remember this very vividly. My mom telling me this story that she was 8 years old. And she asked, why are they not staying? And he said, because they think we're going to do to them what they want to do to us. And having his experience in Afghanistan, though they were protected by the king, there were a lot of pogroms there as well. My great-grandfather became the head of the Afghan community on Yom Kippur, or after Yom Kippur back in the 19th century, because in the prayer, the head of the community stepped out for a moment during the day of prayer, and his head was rolled back into the synagogue. And it wasn't a synagogue, it's an area of prayer for the Jews. And they never found the body, so he was executed. Years later, I'm jumping now to experience that I had, which reminded me of this. I fought in Lebanon in the First Lebanon War, and in a town in the mountains of Lebanon, and I made friends there with a Druze family. And he was telling me how we're different than the Syrians, and it's not very smart on our part. And I said to him, what do you mean by that? He said, look, at the entrance of the town here, there's a electric pole. That electric pole, every few months, they come by, they grab somebody, and they hang them up there, the Syrians, who were occupying Lebanon at the time. And he said, they would tell us, that's because you're behaving yourself. Now understand what will happen if you don't behave. And he said, you Israelis have to understand that's our mentality. And I mentioned that because then I remembered what my mother said about that time, that when my grandfather, why did they execute that the head of the community then? Because they behaved themselves. Had they not behaved themselves, they would have killed them all in the area of prayer. So nothing changes here. These things stay the same. So Israel then, while you had these 600,000, 600,000 to 700,000 Arabs who lived here, and they still called themselves Arabs at the time, we had nearly 1 million Jews from Arab countries who were expelled around those years from these Arab countries, places they lived for hundreds, thousands of years. and they were absorbed inside the state of Israel. And we received no UN assistance, no UN, there wasn't considered refugee status because they were Jews moving into their own area. Whereas the Arabs kept their people in the situation of refugees. And because there are 24 Arab countries and around that time 40, now there are over 50 Muslim countries in the world, they were able to put in the United Nations pass a resolution that recognized every situation of refugees, and there have been many since World War II. The people are considered refugees for a few years until they're absorbed in another location. You cannot be a refugee, regardless of if you've been moved out of your home or not. You cannot be a refugee in your own country. But the UN refugee status is for them for a few years, up to 10 years. The Arabs passed a resolution that accepted that they would be considered, that refugees could be considered as inheritance, and every generation. And while they were kept in these refugee camps, now, once again, Arabs who in an area they claimed to be their own were in these refugee camps, and not only recognized as refugees, they were given the status of continuous, meaning up until today, somebody, the great-grandchildren of people of that time, can receive benefits from UNRWA. They created their own specific body, which is UNRWA, United Nations Refugee Works Association, or whatever it's called. So they had these benefits already at that time. Over the years, they realized they had to change and shift. Now, between the 1948 and until 67, there was no occupation. And yet they still did not accept the existence of Israel. And there were terrorist attacks coming from areas that were under Egyptian control and Jordanian control.
Daniel, I have to stop you for 1 second. Sure. Because I'm just going to ask that you speak to maybe an audience with not as high a bar of understanding. So could we take one step back? You say there wasn't an occupation. Define occupation and why there wasn't an occupation.
Well, there's the other thing, anything, not the international community, but people, could be academics, can be journalists, can be the average Joe or Joanne for that matter. They consider Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria, which occurred after the Six-Day War, as Israeli occupation. But there was never an entity, a recognized entity in these areas. It was Jordanian territory. Jordan attacked Israel in 67, and through that became a legitimate, on our part, the ability to defeat them and conquer territory is acceptable under international law. They always wave international law at us, but they apply it selectively when it comes to Jews. And this happens very similar throughout history. Their laws and their way laws are applied to Jews. So it doesn't change when it's international law. Take in consideration that between 48 and 67 and years later, you not only had over 20 Arab countries and 40 some Muslim countries, you also had third world countries. You had the Third World Organization, which was under the guidance of although the Soviet Union wasn't part of it, it was something that they pushed. So you had all these third world countries in line with the Arabs. So you would have anywhere between 100 countries, a vast majority that were automatically positioned against Israel. So they could pass whatever they wanted in the United Nations and declare anything they wanted because you had an automatic majority against Israel. Now, if these things are passed through the Security Council, so for years you basically had the United States passing a veto on these things. But general assemblies, which are not binding, you have hundreds of resolutions passed criticizing Israel and creating not a reality, but a perception of reality. And one of those perceptions is that these are refugees, and second, we are an occupier force. Now, just an interesting thing that people don't know, that even the areas that Israel took in the 48 war, which made it legitimate under international law, recognized as the state of Israel, even then there were European countries, such as Britain, for example, that did not want to accept that and wanted to pressure Israel into ceding areas in the Galilee toward the Arab minority there and giving them an autonomy. And in the Sinai and in the Negev, the south of Israel, transferring this territory to Egypt. It was called the Alpha Plan. And this was in 1952, 53, 54. And they had an intention of pushing this forward. And if Israel did not accept it, Britain, the plan was for Britain to invade Israel and impose this on Israel. It changed in 1956, the moment Egypt went to war against the British or European interests in what was called the Sinai Mitzvah Kadesh in Hebrew, the 56 war, in which Israel took the Sinai and fought this together with the British and the French. So you had that situation. We held the Sinai at that point. The United States pressured Israel into ceding that territory in return for a presence of the United Nations in the Sinai. And I mention these things because they build up to what we're dealing with today. Basically, we're given international guarantees in return for us making concessions, despite the fact that we were attacked, despite the fact that we were victorious in this battle. We were pressured into ceding that territory in return for a UN presence there. It lasted all of 10 years. Well, 10 years from the moment we withdrew from the Sinai until Egypt in May of 1967 threatened the United Nations forces there, told them to leave. Then they closed down the Straits of Tiran, which is, again, under international law, considered an act of war when they tried to create an embargo on Israel and threatened that they're going to attack Israel. And there was all the indications that Egypt and Syria were bound together as the United Arab Republic, or whatever they called themselves at that time, UAR, and along with Jordan and with the assistance of Iraq and other Arab countries, were planning to assault Israel. Israel initiated, because already by international law, again, since their act was an act of aggression, we attacked the Egyptians, their Air Force taking that out, giving us air superiority. And it's all familiar with the Six-Day War. Within 6 days, we're able to defeat these militaries. Again, people forget Israel is a small country. It is, at that time, there were about 2 million population in Israel. You had several 100 million Arabs in Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, etc. And this was the things that we faced. We were able to defeat them then. Israel offered. At that time, we took Judea and Samaria, released it from the control of Jordan. The Sinai retook it once again, and the Golan Heights. We offered the Arab League that we would cede these territories in return for a peace agreement and recognition of Israel. As you mentioned before, that was in the Khartoum meeting in September of 67. A few months later, they rejected it and said they would not recognize Israel, no peace, etc., etc. There was a war of our attrition that a lot of people don't know, that a few months later began in around December of in the beginning of 68. Between 68 and 71, there was a war of our attrition, missiles, terrorist attacks between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Syria. So it was never really peace there. And then you had the Yom Kippur War, which erupted in 1973. Egypt and Syria. This time, Jordan decided not to join in. They attacked Israel. We were able to fend them off and hold them off after about a week, and then moved in to controlling their territory. And they surrounded in the Sinai. We were able to surround the Third Army of the Egyptians and move into Egyptian areas 100 kilometers away from Cairo. In Syria, we were able to move them back and move in to about 10 kilometers away, or I'm sorry, 30 kilometers away from Damascus. And at that point, again, the United States applied pressure to Israel. Kissinger believed at that time that if they were able to see this as a victory, a victory in war, there's a better chance that they would be willing to recognize Israel and have some kind of peace. Now, you can argue that, and there were negotiations, and Israel withdrew from Egyptian territory back into the Sinai. We moved out of certain areas. These are supposed to be areas that were demilitarized. And it took a few years, and only after the government here changed, and for the first time, the Labour Party lost the election, and Menachem Begin was elected. And Menachem Begin immediately, one of the first things he did at that time, and I remember thinking about it, took the hero of the Six-Day War, who was Moshe Dayan, who very much failed with the Yom Kippur War, offered him to be, although he was from another party, be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, knowing that Moshe Dayan had extensive ties with the Arab countries over the years, very secret ties. And he told them to go to Egypt and offer. Now, you can take that in the personal, meaning Israel, Egypt, but there's also the world things that are happening. It's usually more important and more influential on what is happening. And here you had the Cold War at that time. So the United States also had an interest in moving Egypt away from the Russians and moving them in to the American and NATO and Western functionary. And so they were able to make this deal where Israel would withdraw from the Sinai. Very long negotiations, took about 2 years. Eventually, Israel, in 3 moves, would withdraw by 79. It was all signed. And I participated before the war in Lebanon in the final parts of withdrawing and we're removing all Israelis who lived in the Sinai, with dismantling those communities and leaving there and with the peace. And glad to say that this cold, very cold peace with Egypt has lasted since then, over 40 years now. And so maybe Kissinger was right to a certain degree. Basically saying we don't have to love each other, but there's no need for a war. But around that time, you had, it wasn't enough for the Labor Party and the left wing in Israel that Menachem Begin and the right wing were victorious and won the election. He also made peace, something that they always said that they were going to achieve. And suddenly, not only is he victorious in there, he's also bringing peace with Egypt. So they weren't satisfied with him moving forward with that. Then started the whole Peace Now movement, which was something that occurred in the United States during Vietnam. But here it was different. It's not enough just to have peace with it. We need it now. We need it now. And kept pressuring him to make concessions to the Egyptians. I mentioned that because this was the beginning of trying to find peace with others. And in the years after Menachem Begin, we had the war in Lebanon. We had the expulsion of the PLO. PLO were in, and the creation of the Palestinians began actually before the Six-Day War. 1964, they were created. This was through the Soviet propaganda, which told them you have to shift the concept here between Israel, the small David, and all the Arab countries that are the Goliath. Focus on what has happened to the Arabs there. You're talking about cultural appropriation. They appropriated the term of Palestine and made it to be Arab and used that as the acceptable term and then focused on resistance and they didn't call it terror, though that's exactly what it was, and had to start focusing on that and undermine Israel through this small resistance organization, the PLO, who we were told for many years that they're the only representative of and the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So after the war in Lebanon, which the PLO were expelled from there, by the way, their center was in Jordan for many years, and they tried to undermine the King Jordan and the kingdom in Jordan. Jordan expelled them. It was called the Black September in September of 1970, and they went to Lebanon. They disrupted the balance there between Muslims, Christians, Druze, etc. And they started in 75. They had the civil war began, which lasted for over 10 years in Lebanon because of the PLO influence there, negative influence. And they were eventually expelled by Israel in 1982. In October of 1982, and they moved in to Tunisia. So for a while there was no PLO, at least not on our borders, and the effort against Israel continued. They continued through different acts of terrorism. They started hijacking aircraft. We're familiar with the years of hijackings, etc. And then you had the Gulf War. And after the Gulf War, there was the Madrid Conference, where they tried to reach some kind of understanding, and Shamir was prime minister at the time. And before that, you had the attempt on part of the Labor Party with Shimon Peres, who were part of the government. They tried to create negotiations in London, secret negotiations with the PLO, when the Shamir government, when he found out that his foreign minister, Shimon Peres at the time, was doing this. It was a national unity government. They broke up and went to elections. Shamir won the election, and that died at that point. But then a few years later, after the Gulf War, for many different reasons we won't go into, but Rabin was able, because Rabin was considered, he was the chief of staff during the Six-Day War, was considered Mr. Security. and he was able to bring the Labor Party and the left wing in Israel to power. Shimon Peres and his people wasted no time to start trying to create these negotiations with the PLO once again. And they met at that time in Oslo, and very secret negotiations and talks. Nobody knew about it in Israel. And I remember, very interesting, we had this round of conflict at that time with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And afterwards, I had an Italian journalist to me saying, I don't understand this Labor Party. This was in August of '93. The Labor Party is supposed to bring peace, and here you have a war in Lebanon. And I said to him, well, we never know what's happening behind the scenes. Who knows? Maybe they're somewhere around the world having some secret negotiations right now. I had no idea. And a month later, they announced the Oslo agreements. And
Okay, Danny, I really need to pause you at this point because that was a half-hour highlight reel. And I really want to be able to compartmentalize this information, which is a warning to me never to ask for a highlight reel from a scholarly historian, because I think this could go on for days.
I gave you the highlights.
So just a few things I do want to just go back and highlight really quickly of that highlight reel. In the beginning, when Danny mentions about, I'm going to go way back, 47, 48, that the Arabs were at that point told by the other Arabs that were attacking Israel to leave so that they would be safe, and that they were afraid. I love what you said, that Israel would do to them what they would like to do to Israel. We have to understand this is a refrain that has been repeated over and over and over again. Even Netanyahu has said very clearly, you ask the Palestinians, or you ask the Jews to lay down, sorry, you ask the Palestinians to lay down their arms and there will be peace. You ask the Jews to lay down.
That was Golda Meir.
I know. No, I know it was, but I said,
and he repeated it, right? He did repeat that.
To what I'm saying is to today. And speaking of Golda Meir, if anybody reads her autobiography, there's very little in it that would indicate to you that it's not happening today. It's surreal how little things have changed. Also understanding how they literally hijacked the word Palestinian, which is ironic in and of itself, because the name Palestine was given to the land under British mandate. It wasn't actually.
No, it was given by the Romans back in 100
right.
AD, and because to erase the connection between the Jews and the land of Israel because of a revolt, we were the only people who successfully revolted against the act of revolt. It was torn down and we were defeated, but we were one of the few peoples that actually stood up against the Romans. And they also changed the name of one of the more important places for Jews, which is Shechem, and they changed it to Neapolis. And because the Arabs don't have the letter P in their language, it's called Nablus, just the way as there's no word at Palestine in Arabic, and it's Philistine or Palestine. So they appropriated those terms.
Why? How were they so successful in hijacking a term that previously referred to literally people would have thought Jews? Why didn't they choose a word like Levant? Why was the world so eager to allow them to take on the name of Palestinians? It's so weird. Golda Meir was a Palestinian.
First off, we but we turned away from that word. You remember today you have a paper called the Jerusalem Post. Then it was called the Palestine Post. Right. The flag of Palestine was the Jewish flag that you have behind you. The team of Palestine that played in football games, football matches in Europe at that time were the Jews. So you had all these things. It was quite clear it was them. But the word disappeared. Now, another important thing is to remind people is that none of the Arab countries who attacked Israel at that time did it for the Arabs who lived here. They did it to destroy Israel. Egypt wanted parts of the south the Negev of Israel. Jordan wanted parts of it. And of course, Syria, see it all as being southern Syria. That's what it was historically, by the way, under
Sorry,
the under the Ottoman Empire.
I have to stop you for 1 second. When you say to destroy Israel, you mean capture the land or destroy the people? Like the
Both.
concept of Israel or the physical, like, oh, and I think
Both.
people don't understand also just how teeny tiny Israel is and the fact that people want to divide it up and up and up when it's 1/500th the size of the Arab world.
It's smaller than New Jersey. Now, if you combine it with Judea and Samaria, we're about the size of New Jersey, and the Arab world is about the size of the United States if you take all the Muslim and Arab countries together. But no, they made it very clear. And by the way, even before there was a state of Israel, even before there was an occupation post 67, there were pogroms against Jews here. And why? There was no occupation then. And in 1926, 1921, 1926, 1929, 1936, there were all these vicious acts, very similar to what happened on October 7th, of the Arabs that people had lived with for years. It happened in Hebron, it happened in Sfat, it happened in Jaffa, it happened every place around here. And by the way, it also happened years before. People don't realize there were Jews living here in Hebron. There was a continuous Jewish population in Hebron from back in the times of Jesus in 2000 and up until 1929, which they were expelled by the Arabs, their Arab neighbors. So when the Arab countries attacked here, they all wanted parts of it. They all wanted pieces of it. They didn't give a damn about the Arabs who lived here. But afterwards, they became, and especially after the Six-Day War and totally after the 73 war, when they realized Israel cannot be defeated, they started turning to other things, which were basically employing the Palestinian cause for propaganda, but also using them as terrorists to undermine the stability of the state of Israel. So they announce it and they say it. And by the way, it's all part of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Islam came out of Arabia and it spread throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and into Asia. And they have these areas that are called Dar el-Islam, the areas, the land of Islam, which is any place they occupied. By the way, in their vision, Andalus is what they call Spain. They occupied Spain for several hundred years. Mm-hmm. So should the Spanish give it back to them until they were expelled by the Spaniards? So they still consider Spain as Andalus and Dar el-Islam, meaning Islamic land. Dar el-Harb, it's any place standing up against Islam. And that means that is the land of the sword, meaning they take the sword to eliminate the people who are opposing them in Islam. And that's what they're doing with Israel. They cannot accept the fact, if we were willing to be dhimmi, under control of Islam, that's one thing. But since we stood up against them and retook this area, to them, it is an insult to their religious belief or their Islamic belief. And so they never hid that thing. We on the West, not only Israel, but in the West, they try to make some kind of, no, they don't really mean that. They're not like that. Yes, they are. And it's only this condescending attitude of people in the West who disrespect the Arabs. That's what they believe in. That's their history. That's what they're about.
Yeah. I do. I actually recommend that people listen to my podcast with Yasmin Mohammed, who is an ex-Muslim who goes into very, very in-depth from a firsthand account into these concepts. But let's get back to the peace process because, you know, as we all know, the biggest story of the day really isn't even the war as much as this two-state solution. And I really want to push this story forward starting in essentially 1993. So it's 1993 we're like in the shadow of the Gulf War. And this Oslo peace process begins. You started to talk about Yitzhak Rabin. So Sorry that I interrupted you, but I
No,
did
no,
want to
it's fine.
clarify some things. And I think that when I told you we may have to block out 10 hours, now I'm thinking 20. But I appreciate your enthusiasm and your vast knowledge. Can you, I know you were about to go there, but can you lay out sort of the geopolitical landscape that like provided the impetus for the 1993 Accords to begin? As we say, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Well, there was first off, there was what we called the first Intifada. There was in Gaza, there was an accident, and some Arabs were killed, and they took that and went to the streets. And even before this full-fledged Intifada happened, there were eruptions here and there of violence, terrorism. Sometimes we had to move into places and take out terrorist cells, etc. So it was never really quiet. But I can just give you the example. I moved to Israel from the United States. I grew up there. My mom met my dad. He was American Air Force, and I grew up on Air Force bases. And in '71, when he retired, my mom said, "Let's try and living in Israel." And we lived in Ashkelon. Ashkelon is just north of Gaza. And in 1971, just a few years after the Six-Day War, and we would go to Gaza all the time. And Gazans worked with it. I remember my dad back in '73, '74, going to a wedding of one of his colleagues at work. He worked in a factory in Ashkelon, and he went to a wedding in the Shati refugee camp in Gaza. And there were a lot of Arabs working throughout the Gazans and working especially in Ashkelon because it's the closest place, closest city. And we would go there almost every weekend. So there were these, you didn't have to love each other, but we lived together. And so there was this existence, but from time to time it would erupt into periods of violence. And then you had the Intifada, which was a bit more intense and lasted for longer. Eventually, Israel was able to squash it. And this was very much the PLO tried, although the PLO were out in Tunisia, they tried, the world became smaller when you have more abilities to contact. And they took advantage of the technology to be able to move messages into people in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. And eventually we were able to take them out, and you had this lull. And Rabin, and especially Paris, this more came from Paris, they believed that this is an opportunity since PLO are weakened, since it's clear to them that they're not going to be coming back. Maybe if we offer them recognition, and because years, I remember I already was working in our consulate in New York with the foreign ministry. And I remember the things that we were told. We have to recognize the PLO. If we recognize the PLO, there'll be peace. And the PLO are the only the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And if we cede territory, there'll be peace. So, and the left wing were pushing this from after the Lebanon War, throughout that decade, after the Gulf War, they were pushing this constantly. And then with the Intifada, which happened just before the Gulf War, they were all saying, look, if we try this and we do this with them, there'll be peace because that's what we would have done. So, of course, they're going to want to do the same thing. So Paris did have his meetings with them, and they met in Europe, and they for extended period of time. Like I said, I didn't know about it, but then in September it was announced that a Italian journalist came to me, Danny, you son of a bitch, why didn't you not tell me? I said, I had no idea. I wasn't that high-ranking an official. And even high-ranking officials had no idea. But anyway, and that happened. I can tell you personally, who I'm not hiding the fact, I never hid it before, grew up in a very right-wing family, in a Likud family, since I was very young. And I had my reservations about it. I wasn't even happy with the concessions we made to Egypt a few years before. And so I said, you know what? Maybe they're right. And I worked with the prime minister's office at the time, and I said, maybe they're right. I have to explain this to journalists that I work with. Wasn't even a high-ranking official at the time. And said, all right, let's give it a chance. Maybe I've been wrong. Maybe people like me have been wrong all these years. It took me very quick to realize two things. One, they're lying to us. They're deceiving us. And they said they're very open about it. Arafat himself was being criticized by Arabs, And he said to them, no, this is like Chodeba. This is like what we did with the Jews back then. I'm lying to them, given the opportunity. Will And here they heard these things. They saw it. They weren't blind to it. No, no, they don't. They need to say that because that's their society. And by the way, I mention this because I think one of the problems and one of the reasons for the failure, and there's no way denying that today, is the fact that we didn't hold them and make sure that they respected their
Hmm.
commitments as well. We didn't do that. We always made excuses for them. We always were not only apologetic, they warped things around. Shimon Peres, after you had when the second Intifada started, and when the violence erupted, just a year after the signing of the Oslo agreements, you had a round of violence. In 2000, the real Intifada began, but you had a round. Then it was Hamas. They told us all these years we have to recognize the PLO. We recognize them, and suddenly you also have Hamas. That
Right.
they're responsible for these terrorist attacks, although members of the PLO also took part in these things. But Peres, he coined the phrase "victims of peace." That all the losses we're experiencing right now, these are victims for peace. They'll get
Ah,
over this, and then we'll be able to move forward. So I left after a year. I
amazing.
realized we were lying to ourselves, and that's when I started working with the IDF spokesman. And then I was with the IDF spokesman when Arafat came in. We gave them Jericho and ceded territory. Once again, here we ceded territory. If you cede territory, there'll be peace. And there was talk about the two-state solution. Now there has to be a Jewish state and an Arab state, a Palestinian state. And
Is
the
this
Israelis
the
were all,
first time that we heard the term two-state solution?
now the left wing were pushing for it for a very long time, but this is when it was accepted by Israel. It was not accepted by the PLO.
But is it when the term of two-state
Yeah,
solution really
yeah,
took hold in the world as like
yeah,
this is where we have to be headed? Okay.
yeah. And that's the solution. That's the only way of solving this. But Arafat and the PLO never committed to that. To them, there
Hmm.
would be a Palestinian state, and then on the Israeli side, a state of all its civilians. Would not be a Jewish state. They were refused to accept that. And that's what Israel is all about.
So
And so, but that, you can put that in the back burner and move forward and see. And if you live together and we all sing Kumbaya, my Lord, and my sweet Lord, and follow in the footsteps of George
imagine
Harrison,
all the
and
people.
exactly, and
Yes.
John Lennon, and then we can all live here happily ever after. But that didn't happen.
So
And here, people were not happy. There was a lot of terrorism, a lot of victims of peace, and they called on the government to demand more of the PLO. Right, we're going forward with this. The government is committed to it. And then we had, unfortunately, the
okay.
assassination of Rabin,
Okay, hold on.
which
I want to I don't want to move forward quite yet. Okay,
okay,
I want to stick with Oslo if that's okay for a moment longer. Because so the culmination of this was this like iconic like Clinton last handshake, right? Between Rabin and Arafat. I mean, we all remember that and it seems like little else, but we're still talking about Oslo to this day. In fact, we're talking about it today. So before we move forward to what happened to Rabin,
you're also
what?
talking about World War II until this day. It doesn't mean that World War II is continuing. So we talk about Oslo as a concept. It's not
Yes.
there anymore, but we'll get to that.
Oh, no, no, I absolutely agree. No, I absolutely agree, and we are going to get to that. But the reason I say that we're still talking about it today is because if you can just lay out briefly, uh, if there were politically, as you see it, significant successes. Did anything positive come out of this process? Anything besides a handshake? It was a good handshake, you got to admit.
It depends on who you think who profit from it. The Arabs did. Not only did,
Let's talk about Israel. But
and
was it
that's the whole thing. I'm saying
anything?
Israel, no, there was
Yeah,
nothing for Israel. Not only
nothing.
did Israel, we ceded territory, we recognized the PLO, PLO was recognized internationally, no longer as a terrorist organization, terrorist entity, but as the legitimate representative of the Palestinians. They had a government in Ramallah. And then a few years later, you had elections, and in Gaza, they elected Hamas, and suddenly Hamas had taken over, and they were violent against the PLO to make sure that they cannot return to power there. And so you had a terrorist organization, Islamic jihadist Hamas in Gaza. You never had elections again in Judea and Samaria in the Palestinian Authority areas because they understood that they would lose the election there as well. So now you have first Arafat and then Abu Mazen, the dictators. But then you had them funneling and funding money. And in no way, while we here, we're all talking on our side, on the Jewish side, accepting Oslo, even governments afterwards accepted and continued in the process. I remember Netanyahu, I worked with the prime minister. I came back to the prime minister's office with Netanyahu. Netanyahu met with Arafat, stood this far away from Arafat and kept myself from smacking him.
Good job.
The thought did cross my mind. I said, damn, I'm so close to him right now.
Right.
But so you had these meetings and it continued. And we gave them the ability to control those areas there.
Yeah.
And they were trained by the United States, by the CIA. Yeah. And then they started paying money to anybody who was engaged in terrorism against the Jewish population in Israel. But then you have another front. You not only have the front of Judea, Samaria, Gaza, there's also a very important front, which is the cognitive warfare.
Right.
And I know you discussed this with Richard a few weeks ago on that battlefield of ideas. And here, for the first time, we legitimized the Arab side. We legitimized the fact that they are Palestinians, therefore it's their land. They then, once again, not only appropriated Palestine, they appropriated the fact that they are indigenous. And all these things were accepted and became, and two states started saying, no, the Arabs are the ones making the concessions. And they were even talking about going back to what was once called, they didn't know, they weren't basing it on the Alpha Plan of the British. There was also talk in Israel in the mid-90s of giving autonomy to the Israeli Arabs in the Galilee and in the Negev. So they were looking to expand it. So they basically won this in many ways, to the point today that if the two-state idea is dead, it's basically because of them and their supporters. Because what is the thing that everybody is, besides calling for a global intifada, which what does that mean? It means against the West. But they're also calling from the river to the sea.
Right.
And by that they mean there's no state of Israel. They're talking about a genocide. That's the genocide that they want to do. And they were looking to do on October 7th and did not succeed with.
Absolutely. And in getting back to this concept of the information war, because I have to admit, because I'm so young, 54 tomorrow. In 1993, I was fresh out of college and not fully apprised of what was going on in Israel, to be honest. So I do want to like hang on to this moment for a second, because I'm trying to understand not just what was the world opinion of Israel in 1993, but even then, like, everyone already knew, okay, the PLO was a terrorist organization. We knew that. Israel was an up-and-coming democracy, which for its first decades was the hero of the West. Everybody was just so in awe of the miracle of the Jewish state, and everyone rallied around it, really, in the entire free world. What I'm trying to understand, Daniel, is when and why the world stopped looking at Israel as this miraculous, we always use the David and Goliath analogy, this miraculous, like, David success story, and started viewing Israel as the threatening Goliath, despite being, as I mentioned before, 1/500th the size of the threatening Arab world around them. What was going on in 93, like
Nothing
in
changed. It was all
people's
the same. You
minds?
talk about Israel was perceived as the darling of the world, maybe in Hollywood, maybe because we're an open society, et cetera, here in the Middle East. And following the Holocaust, there was guilt in Europe, et cetera. But we suffered from a boycott. We who were attacked, we who accepted the UN partition plan, the world boycotted. There was an arms embargo on Israel. The only ones who violated the embargo was the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia at the time, and the Jewish mafia in the United States. They were using their control and access to the ports to get weapons to Israel, but Czechoslovakia were basically the ones, and it was interesting that the Soviet Union also assisted us. But the Western countries did not. France then broke that after 48, and they were very supportive of Israel for a long time. But again, after the 56 war, the United States did not start supporting Israel until after 67. There's nothing Americans love more than a winner. And in 67, we were this amazing winner because we defeated. Everybody was expecting us. Abba Eban spent a month before the war going through different capitals, the United Nations, telling them, look, put a stop to this. Hold they violated the UN resolution that was accepted 10 years before. Everybody patted him on the back. Good luck. We wish you well. Israel was boycotted then as well. No weapons were coming in. The French, we had to go and steal ships that we paid for from Cherbourg that the French boycotted us with. On the 73 war, again, Europe would not let American planes that were bringing weapons to Israel after we were attacked by Egypt and Syria. Nixon, very surprising. Kissinger was against it. Nixon insisted because it's an American. Nixon understood that this was more than just Israel and the Arab countries. It is part of the Cold War going on. And if the United States betrays Israel, it loses its allies. So Nixon assisted Israel at that time. Europe would not allow the planes from the United States bringing weapons into Israel to land in Europe. So it was never that we were that accepted and seen. Now, after the signing of the Oslo agreements, I remember how there was every world leader was coming to Israel. Every week we had another. For us, it was a pain in the behind because we were working with the media and we had to set up these press centers and these events and make sure the press can cover every one of these events, and it was our responsibility. So we were consistently working at those things and doing that. Rabin was considered, and then they won, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize was given to them. They were thinking that if they create this atmosphere, again, applying our own values, not only Israel, but Western values, that if Arafat gets this and we all accept him and give him these prizes, that's not what he was created for. That's not what he existed for. That's not what Islam is about. And they did not understand. And they consistently excused, ignored, and if anything happened, if we erupted into violence that we had to cut down, and the pressure immediately they would give us. And by the way, this happened years since the Intifada. Every time there was another round, either with Gaza or with Lebanon, we knew in government that we had 4, 5, 6 days after we were attacked, and it was usually them attacking us. I can't even remember a case in which we were the ones who initiated it, but it was always them violating the agreement or making some excuse to justify what they were saying that was immediately accepted by the international media that would echo what they were saying as if that's the fact. And then we knew we had 4, 5, 6 days with the world leaders who knew what the facts were, would give Israel that opportunity to do what it needed to do, to crack down on the violence and get rid of and put an end to it. But then afterwards, with the demonstrations like we see today, there would be demonstrations. So we would have at best 2 weeks maybe like we had with the second war in Lebanon, a month, and before international pressure ties
Right.
our hands and keeps us from having total victory against them and constantly encouraging them, not this round, we'll do it next round. We can get away with this because there was never a price for them to pay.
Again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This story
Exactly.
has not changed, and I can just as easily. I hope that people who are listening can understand how easily everything that Danny is saying now, going all the way back 80 years, can just as easily be superimposed on what's going on today. Nothing has changed. These are called double standards, and double standards are anti-Semitic. And if people don't understand that the undercurrent of anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe, has never left. It cycles, but it's been there since the beginning of time. And it really, I, America has a pretty spotty past itself. But what we're seeing today is amplified by social media and the media, but it's certainly nothing new. So I want to move forward a little
Before
bit.
that, I just want to give you an
Yeah.
example of what you're saying, that even with people that you would expect, and I'm talking about diplomats and journalists,
Yes.
I encountered, because we also worked with journalists, and sometimes we take them on tours and things, and just through their questions, you understand where they were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But you would say, okay, these are journalists, you expect something different from them. And one of the most prominent journalists, British journalist, whose father was also a very prominent member of the British government at the time. She was here during the Second Lebanon War. She had been here for a few years. I knew she was leaving. Her departure was delayed because of the war. And we were sitting at the middle of the night in some place where the journalists gathered. And I was saying, you've been here for 5 years. What are your impressions and what do you feel? And I guess she had a little more to drink. And she says to me, I despise you. You're a despicable people. And I say, all of us? Say, all of you. You're all despicable. So I'm saying, you're talking about all of us. At that time, the Jewish population of Israel was 6 million. So I say to her, you're talking about 6 million. And I just said 6 million. She went off.
Right.
On the beer halls of Munich would have saluted her because, oh, there you go again. You're bringing up this Holocaust and the Jews are this and the Jews are that. Said, whoa, if she is supposed to be a sophisticated, educated British of the elite British, if that's what she says when she has a little alcohol, she was not drunk, then I dread to think what people who think and say amongst themselves. This was especially true with the Irish journalists. And look, I said my mom met my dad. My dad converted to Judaism. So half my family are Christian.
Mm,
And there's a huge difference. And I even say they're from redneck Pennsylvania. That's how Christian they
right.
are. And although here and there you would hear things that are stereotypes of, there was no hate. There was not
Right.
in their environment. That doesn't happen in most places in the United States. So in Europe, it is far worse. And unfortunately, it's spread to the United States as well now.
Agree. It's scary. And when you say that you fear what they think in their heads versus what they might say in their mouths, what I fear more is the fact that we don't have to think about it anymore. We can see it on social media, and there's no more
Uh,
shame. There's
I don't
no
fear it at all because there's a difference today. Today, we're here in the state of Israel. We can defend ourselves. We can protect ourselves. And basically, can you curse on your podcast?
I'll say bleep when you curse.
Basically, to
Say what you
me
want.
today, I don't even
Yes.
engage in debates with these people. I
Yes.
curse them out. And basically, as far as I'm concerned, they can all go bleep themselves.
Good self bleeping. I mean, but my real issue isn't the fact that they're saying it, is the fact that they're emboldened to say it. That people no longer have to be drunk to say something that they might wake up to regret. Now, the
No, there's no regret.
normalization of anti-Semitism is what's so frightening and so dangerous. So Oslo is a complete failure for Israel, a success for the terrorists. Again, history repeats. After that, there was this slow burn that ultimately exploded, as you said, into the Second Intifada, which was actually after the Camp David summit of 2000, which we didn't even talk about yet. In this summit, which I welcome you to add to, but Prime Minister then, who was Ehud Olmert, offered a Palestinian state in Gaza. People have to understand this was like the first like really big offer, which included more than 90%. When I say more, it was up to 92. It depends on how you look at it. Of
No,
the West Bank.
he offered not only in Gaza and the entire areas
Yes.
under the Palestinian Authority control, and in return for areas such as the Jewish neighborhoods of Jerusalem or places that Jews expanded to, in return they'd give them territory near Gaza. Maybe the Egyptians would get, but anyway, it would end up about 95% of what they wanted, meaning they basically got everything they wanted.
Yeah.
They
And
were offered everything they wanted.
And it included East Jerusalem as its capital, which has been
Right.
a very difficult pill to swallow. And land swaps for the balance of land that didn't make up when we're saying 95%. There were land swaps for the rest. Arafat walked away from this. People have to understand he walked away without so much as a counter offer. So Daniel, what was the Second Intifada, and not just what was it, but what happened at Camp David of all places that sparked this 5-year wave of terror? It's hard for a rational person to connect these dots. What am I missing?
Well, first off, that the Intifada was planned. The Shin Bet, and I know this at that time was the first time that the Shin Bet began working with the media, and they worked through my office. And I know afterwards, it began in September 21st, after Rosh Hashanah. And Avi Dichter, who was the head of Shin Bet there, said they are ready in April. They were expecting it to happen in April. For some reason, it didn't. Arafat didn't follow through with it. Maybe because of the talks of Camp David, and that I believe it was Clinton was the president at the time. They wanted them. Was it Clinton or was it? What were we talking about back in
2000. Please don't make me do math and thinking.
no, it's Bush. We're talking about Bush at that time.
Yeah, sure, because
It was after
2001.
it was just
Yeah.
before 9/11. It may have been the end.
No.
No, it was
Yeah.
2000. Yeah. So anyway, um,
To Israel,
Ehud Barak was prime minister,
Ken.
and
Yes.
they did indeed go to Camp David, and they made these offers, and they came back, and we knew within weeks there we didn't expect it to blow up as to the degree that it did, but apparently they were building an infrastructure, a terrorist infrastructure, in these areas that we had no access to. And it started with in the Gaza Strip, and the media again were very much helped blow this out of proportion. Initially, Israel was accused of starting this, but basically it started with a blood libel, which was they already started violence, but then they made up this story of a young boy, Mohammed al-Dura, that they said was killed by Israel. And we all accepted that was the fact, and that he was killed there, and that pushed the Arabs into this whole thing. Later on, we discovered that this was a whole thing was what they call now Pallywood.
Yeah. And we go into, and just for anybody who's watching, we go into this story in the Richard Landis episode where we talk about Pallywood. This is where the concept of Pallywood took off from.
Because I had somebody come to me who was the commander of the Gaza district, wanted to look into this to find out what is going on. And there was a physicist called Nahum Shachaf who looked into it, and they found it. And he said, we couldn't have done this for different reasons, using angles, using facts. But it didn't reach the general public. The media kept circulating the story. Again, nothing changes, just like they're doing with the hunger
Mhm.
right now. But this Nachum Shachaf, I was asked by the spokesman of Sharon to meet with him, hear what he has to say, because he was insisting that we're making a mistake, accepting responsibility for it. So I set up a time to meet with him, and I expect to be respectful, give him 20 minutes, and he comes in, and his first sentence to me is, "What happened there?" And I tell him what I saw. This young boy was standing there, and he says, "What if I tell you the boy wasn't shot?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look, the last image is the boy lifting his arm. And this was before AI and that you can make up stuff. The kid lifts his arm up, and he's still alive, and he's not, and the blood, it's a cloth, a red cloth that he's handling." So we started going into that, and he gave me all the details, and I literally over the week sat with him with over hundreds of hours, and I sat and I played
Wow.
devil's advocate. I told him, "Look, I know the media. If you say that he was holding a red scarf and it was pink or dark orange, they're going to call you out on that and deny your story on that. So you have to be accurate with
Right.
everything." We went through every phase, and I was totally convinced. And then I go, because this was spread by France 2, the French television. And the correspondent for France 2, he was a member on reserves. He was an Israeli, and he was a member of the IDF spokesman on reserves. And on that day, when that Al-Dura case happened, he called the IDF spokesman. He told them, "Listen," and he would train military commanders, so that they were very accepting for anything that he said.
Hmm.
And he said to them, Charles Anderlen, and he said to them, "Look, this is true. I saw it. Don't deny it. The Israelis killed this boy." So I go to Charles Anderlen and I say to him, "How did you base that on?" Because I was already saw all the material. So I said, "You were there." And he said, "No, no, I wasn't there." I said, "What do you mean you weren't there? That day we were in Ramallah. This was in Gaza." I said, "But you said that you test." No, he said, "I have a photographer who gave me the footage, and I trust him." He said, "But," and I go through this thing with him, A, B, C, and D. But even more than that, I said, "There's a document, a record of a Muhammad al-Dura who died in a car accident the day before, and he was 12 years old. The boy in the picture is not 12 years old." And not only that, he shows me, I said, "I have pictures from the morgue." I said, "Let me see the morgue pictures." And the kid they called Muhammad al-Dura had a tattoo on his arm. There's no tattoo in that image.
Right.
So I'm saying to him, "Look, this is all not accurate. This is all." So you had that thing, and that escalated the violence. Israel was accused of blood libel, and again, killing a little non-Jewish boy. It's all back to what the historical claims of anti-Jewishness. I hate the word anti-Semitism. It's Jew hatred, and
Yes.
it was sanitized and accepted by the media. And when I went to journalists and I told them how many of, not a single one of them was on location. They were all using their Arabs. And then photographers were coming to me and showing me footage of how they were setting up things and doing that. So we found out that we were also dealing not only with physical violence and terrorism, but also with the information war and information terrorism against us. And so that deteriorated, and Barak lost the election that came immediately after that. Ariel Sharon was elected prime minister. And a few months later, after there was a terrorist attack on Passover, and in which over 40 some Jews were killed on the Seder in Netanya, they decided in a full out operation. They tried to not do that for a very long time. They decided we have to go in, dismantle the whole physical part and abilities of the PLO and the other Palestinian organizations that popped up over the years. And that's where it led to. And eventually we're able to bring it to an end around 2004. And Ariel Sharon then also believed that they could go with peace by giving up the Gaza Strip. Here, once again, all Jews leave, will do it on only us without an agreement, and they'll have Gaza. They'll be able to create their own state there. There's not a single living or dead Jew there. And we see what happened from that was that Hamas used the ability. That's what afterwards they took over the Gaza Strip, and they started turning all the aid. They were getting billions of dollars in aid every year, And besides lining their own pockets, they were also building the infrastructure of a terrorist entity against Israel. And they said, I remember at that time, the geniuses were telling us, oh, we have to do this because if we leave, and then if they
Okay.
ever dare to do something against us, the world will justify any
Of,
action that we take and
of
we'll know
course they
what to do.
will.
And if they fire one missile, well, I can tell you,
Right.
over 190,000 missiles were fired at Israeli civilian centers
Yes.
over the years, in the 19 years since we left the Gaza Strip.
And this
Out
is,
from civilian areas, which is a war crime, into civilian areas, which is a war crime,
yes.
and nobody in the world talks about that.
Because they're terrorists, they have no agency. Everything they do is a war crime, and all standards only apply to Israel. Everything is double standards. People have to understand, listen to what Daniel is saying. Israel will sustain, for example, 5 years of an intifada before saying, okay, we need to bring this to an end. They will sustain 10, 20, 30,000 rockets before saying, okay, now it's time for us to reply. There's no other country that either would or would be expected to absorb the kind and amount of terror that Israel does before even responding and then roundly being condemned for that response. Now before we move on, Daniel, one thing we sort of glossed over here during this second intifada period, roughly 2000, we'll say to 2005 with the Gaza withdrawal, within that period, we actually saw two more peace offers. It's easy to overlook because nobody is paying attention. Not you, but the peace offers from Israel. It's so funny that people think that Israel is the country that wants war. Israel offered, now remember that the last offer was somewhere around, let's say, more than 90 plus land swaps. The second one that came right after that increased the West Bank territorial concessions to essentially 95% plus the land swaps. And then another offer upped that ante to 97%. These are high numbers plus swaps. What was the Palestinian?
That was Ehud Olmert. He was prime minister, and he believed that that would be the way that he could secure his being prime minister. This was after Ariel Sharon had a brain aneurysm and
Yes.
was out of government, and Ehud Olmert became. And he tried to pursue this and tried to move that forward. Again, it was rejected on every attempt. In a way, perhaps because of the Hezbollah went to war against us in Lebanon, they very much like what happened with the Hamas here, they sort of sensed a weakness on the part of Israel and decided to, first off, they abducted 2 Israeli soldiers, and then they started firing missiles, 3 Israeli soldiers, and then they fired missiles in the direction of Israel.
Mhm.
And the war erupted, and we started moving in against Hezbollah at that time. The war was a complete, well, it didn't meet the expectations, though in the battlefield it
Mhm.
was very successful. But the country, the government didn't show for the public that, and again, they reached an agreement with the Lebanese, and again, the UN gave us, they moved in a United Nations force into Lebanon, and they had Resolution 1701, which was supposed to prevent the Hezbollah from building an infrastructure in South Lebanon. Under Ehud Olmert, we withdrew from Lebanon back in the year 2000. Within 6 years, we were at a war there because Hezbollah built itself in there. So you had all these things happening. Those 6 years was longer, but it was, I don't remember the exact date right now. But anyway, anytime we made concessions,
Mhm.
anytime we tried to do it, see territory, you'll get peace, recognize this or that, you'll have peace. It always
Mhm.
backfired against us, encouraged the other side, and that's what we had there. And Olmert was removed from power, and again, they had another round of violence with Gaza, which eventually brought Netanyahu to power. And then he had the famous Bar Ilan speech in which he made an offer to
Mm-hmm.
it was Arafat or maybe Abu Mazen at that time,
I don't know.
and he made an offer as well
Right.
of the recognition. He wasn't going to give them a state, but would have an autonomy. And so even Netanyahu did this, and his focus was more on the threat coming from Iran after he was elected in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
elected the second time, and he was trying to end the issue with the Palestinians, trying to reach some kind. I said, look, we'll test this for a few years. If it works out, then we'll talk about if they can start what they still haven't done
Mm-hmm.
50 years later is doing there are requirements under international law
Right.
for entities to be recognized as a functioning state to receive statehood and state recognition by the United Nations. Again, the United Nations it's not may, it will, because they've already accepted them,
Yeah.
but they're not a state as an observer
Yes.
state in the United Nations. So
Yes.
they've already violated and broken principles of the United Nations in the past. So they'll probably recognize them as a state, but it's meaningless on the ground.
Yes.
But Netanyahu had offered this,
Yes.
had they, and there were a series of things that we would check to see if they can run themselves, if they can, and certainly take control of the terrorist element within their society. And not only did they not do that, they encouraged
Yeah.
them. And I was starting to say this previously, that the whole environment, it's mosques, it's the media, it's the school books. By the way, school books funded by the Europeans and by UNRWA, by the United Nations, which when you go, every school book has the calling for the murder of Israelis, not recognizing the state of Israel, not accepting the state of Israel. And then you go into their parliament and into their Ministry of Finance that finances anyone who committed an act of violence against Jews, especially murder. If they're dead, then the family receives. If they're in prison, their family will get a stipend from them, which is about 3 times as much as the average salary. So it encourages them to carry out what they call the pay for slay. If they slay a Jew, they get another. So all these things, no normal or acceptable country does those kind of things.
Yeah.
And yet we are expected to recognize them as such. And if we jump fast forward to October 7th, at that
No,
point,
no, nope, not yet. Not yet. Really quickly, we also left out one other big deal, which was Trump's deal of the century, which came out in 2020. And you can roll your eyes, but the point
no, not rolling my eyes on that.
It's
not part.
No, no.
It's not part of
No,
all the history of peace. It's something totally different.
Right. I understand. I understand it's something totally different, but you don't have to be a historical scholar to know how that ended or any other of these offers. It's always the same story. There's no
hasn't ended.
negotiation. And so it all begs the question, do the Palestinians really even want a state of their own if it means living side by side with the Jewish state?
They can't want a state because there's no such thing as Palestine. The Arabs will never accept that themselves, only as a way of undermining the existence of the state of Israel. But I can tell you today that if Israel is suddenly erased, there will not be a Palestinian state. It'll
Will
be
it be divided up?
Syria, Jordan, Egypt, or who else knows what's happening here. So no, it's never been about a Palestinian state. That's the excuse they use to get the support of all these idiots in the West. And now it's quite clear to most Israelis, you still have, it's just mind-boggling that you still have these people who continue to move forward with this, despite that the people who were the most supportive of living together with the Palestinians and recognizing their rights and joining with them, etc., they were the first and most viciously attacked by their people that they knew, people who worked for them, people that they drove their children to hospitals for treatment. I worked for a while as a spokesman for the Rambam Hospital in Haifa. Every day, dozens of Arab children were being treated in the Gazan children, Gazans in Haifa. Arabs from Gaza and from Judea and Samaria were being trained in the hospital to treat people in their own hospitals. There's a special illness that they have, a kidney disease, that because of the intermarriage there, it's very prominent in their society. The only place that can treat that is Israel. We trained the Arab doctors how to work with that. They worked in the hospital there. The hospital benefited from their presence, but then they would go back in Gaza. So the people would drive them to that. The
Mm-hmm.
people who would let them, that worked with them, that lived together with them, that a few weeks before they had a ceremony of a joint memorial date, they butchered them.
That's right.
So, with all due respect, and I have absolutely none for them, that's over. Now, it started already. It was already clear because of their rejection of every offer. It was clear to the Trump administration that this is not going to work. You have to change the whole. And this is where, again, the
Mm-hmm.
global, just like in Yom Kippur War, the global things come in. The United States, especially under Trump, understands this, that the battle for the future, it's not necessarily war, it's economy. It's always been about the economy. But in this case, it's where the world is going with the new technologies, which is AI,
Mm-hmm.
and how the West and the United States are at a disadvantage when it comes to China. And to balance that, you need two things. First off, to increase and the strength and it's the word I'm looking for. It's not freedom. It's the fact that the Europeans are not dependent, the interdependency of them on oil, etc., by creating this bridge from India and the East to the Europeans, and together with the Arabs, benefiting Arab societies and Arab economies. And at that point, since they don't really care about the so-called Palestinians, so they'll leave it there and they'll go and they'll sign this agreement and recognize Israel. In a way, Hamas, by jumping the gun, because they were part of the Iranian plan, which was to undermine Israel through the different proxies. And they were supposed to do, October 7th was supposed to be a day, not necessarily October 7th, in which Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Arabs in Judea and Samaria, and probably Arabs inside of Israel, together with an umbrella of Iranian missile support, would attack Israel simultaneously. And I can tell you, based on what we saw from October 7th, there would not have been an Israel under those circumstances.
100%.
And apparently, October 7th was a huge miracle for us, because the fact that Hamas found it necessary, and they believed that if they started it, the others would join in. They didn't know that they were not prepared to join in at that point. And so it worked to our benefit, because it also exposed to us what we're dealing with, and also to the Arab countries who understand that it doesn't benefit them in any way. And I have to say that also seeing, and I see that some footage is coming out by some pilot who was flying over Gaza, a former Arab who lived in Gaza, who was flying for one of the Arab Emirates, I believe, and dropping just this week, and showing what is happening in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And to his credit, he said he will never forgive Hamas for doing that. And that is the fact that Gaza is 75% totaled. And not because we were looking to avenge and revenge, but because every house, every location, every school, every kindergarten, every UN installation, everything
Every
was used.
hospital.
Every hospital, everything was used by Hamas, and they built something more. Instead of taking these capabilities and going around the world, New York, and building the subway system there, they built something greater than the London and the New York subway system underneath. But what it created a situation was that not only initially, even when you take down buildings, because of the access that they still
Mm-hmm.
had, they could pop up, and then buildings that were taken out, they
Mm-hmm.
would then booby trap these places.
Mm-hmm.
We have to take everything out. And it means two things. They have nowhere to go back to. But I'm saying, I'm looking at it differently, saying this is for everybody in the Arab world. Now, add to that what we did with Hezbollah in this war. We're already jumping forward. What we did, especially to Iran, Every
Mhm.
Arab country was concerned, worried about Iran. Iran was considered a world power. Nobody believed that
Yeah.
Israel would be able to take out, and we still don't reveal a lot of you know about the beepers, but there was a lot more before that that happened. The missiles, the intelligence that we had was not only on-ground intelligence, there are other ways and means that we were used. The technology that was applied, the technology that, by the way, we share all of it with the United States.
Yes.
Everything that we develop, everything that we is given to the United States. And it helps the American economy as well. And all these things the Arab understand today. And it's not only the images of destruction coming out of Gaza, and the world can whine about this and say how terrible it is. It is a clear, concise message to anybody. If you want to mess around with Israel again, this will be the consequence. Now, in the Middle East, which has proven time and again that concessions, wanting peace, recognizing, singing Kumbaya, my Lord, does not bring peace.
Yes.
This will bring peace. When they
Yeah.
understand that you can't fool around and it will be to your detriment to attack Israel, then if we can't destroy them, then we might as well benefit from them. And maybe sometime in the future, they'll never give up, by the way. And this Assad said this. It doesn't matter if they have relations for us, if they're with us, or they recognize us, it won't matter. Just Assad, the father, said back in the day that the Christians were here, the Crusaders were here. It took us 250 years. We eventually got rid of them. It'll take us a little longer with the Jews. We'll get rid of them as well. They honestly believe that. So that means that
Absolutely.
in the meantime, but I believe that if it becomes an international interest, what Trump wants to do will benefit the Europeans, certainly benefit the United States. It will create, maybe even Russia will join in when they understand that they will benefit from this. Any attack or any attempt to undermine Israel will be an attempt to undermine the interests of the United States. And I'm not talking about interests just like in 73 as Nixon saw it in the Cold War. I'm talking about an interest of the American people
Yes.
that they would benefit financially, economically, and in the future from technologically from everything that they can do with Israel. Then it becomes a really serious American interest. And if they build what they're planning on doing, building a base of a port in Gaza, any attempted war against Israel will undermine the ability of the Americans to run that port, which will benefit the economies of Europe, of the West, etc. These countries won't allow that to happen. And I think this has always been the goal of Netanyahu and always been the vision that he was lucky that Trump understands that and understands the benefits, because nobody does anything because they like you or no, they like you, but this is international relations. And they'll do it if it's something that serves their interest.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, the Democrats in Congress who know full well how America benefits from Israel are still publicly turning against them. And I do worry about where this country is headed, regardless of how much the U.S.-Israel alliance benefits the United States, which when it comes to not just intelligence, not just defense, but also water tech, medical tech is so indispensable. But I can't imagine how are we going to convince the Democrats, once again, whose only job anymore seems to be to undo whatever the Republicans do, and the Republicans are doing Israel right now. I don't know how the people who already understand fully, Chuck Schumer, for example, just to name one, exactly what Israel offers to America and still turn against for the sake of the popular vote. This is a danger to our future.
No, the Democrats, as they are today, are a danger to the future, regardless of what happens with Israel. It's just an extension of the
Yes.
other madness that has befallen them. Chuck Schumer is a schmuck, so and he caters to what he believes to be the voters in his state. And I think that as the economy benefits in the United States, I think Democrats who don't make the proper and look, even with this terrible tragedy that happened yesterday with the
Hmm.
another murder against children by a particular group, that it's not surprising that they're going hand in hand with the terrorists and the jihadists. I think the West is waking up. I think, history, that's always a pendulum. It goes from one extreme
Hmm.
and then goes back. I think we've reached the far reaches of the extreme. Now, the United States is different than Europe because Europe has been invaded.
Yes.
Europe has been invaded. They have Islam is there. They're only starting to wake up to it now. They've been able to create not an imprint, but they've already been able to successfully plant themselves throughout England. In the United States, this is only just beginning at a time when Americans are waking up to all the nonsense that they're being preached to. So I do believe, and I think Americans are always different than the Europeans, regardless, because that's the whole precept of the United States. It was built differently. It was the foundation is different. The one reason that there's such a connection between Israel and the United States is because both countries are built on the Judeo-Christian values.
That's right.
The United States, these values people understand even more importantly today. And I'm talking about, it doesn't necessarily have to be going to church or something. Church is not only going and the religious aspects of it, there are principles of it, that the strength of the family, the united family that's together, parents bringing up the children, a national identity of what you are, what you're about. The United States have a very strong identity. We all grew up with that. I still today, to my kids, I can recite to them the Pledge of Allegiance.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons I would go when I go to the States, and I would go to a baseball game, I go early because I want to make sure I'm there to sing the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
And there were the United States meant and still does mean a lot.
Yes.
And if the United States falls, the civilized world falls. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's why the Iranians call us the little Satan, and the United States is the great Satan, because they
That's right.
understand this. And we're just in their way right now.
Yeah.
That's why Israel, in a way, is fighting, as Netanyahu said, we're fighting the war for civilization, because we've been able to undermine a lot of their plans, but that's what we can do here. Europe
Absolutely.
has to take care of its own interests, and the United States, I have greater trust and belief in the American people.
Okay, I'm going to leave that conversation there because that is such a long conversation that I know is dangerous for me right now. It's one that I had also with Melanie Phillips about godless societies, and
Right.
that I think is what it really comes down to. If you want to talk about Judeo-Christian values in a country where people have for the most part rescinded religion, I think that this is at the base of a lot of our issues. And if you look at who's having children, who wants to propagate uh, civilization, is the religious people. And whether it's the Jews, the Christians,
Not
the Muslims.
necessarily. Look, in Israel, for example, it's the majority of it's not only the religious,
I
it's
don't,
also the secular Israelis.
I'm sorry, I don't mean religious. I mean people who identify with a religion. People in Israel are there as Jews. I'm going to argue, but you know what? I really,
No, it's an important debate because
yes.
it's the debate that is at the center of what is happening in Israel right now.
Okay.
And unfortunately, which gives the expression of it's not even extreme, it's a small number of left-wing Israelis
Hmm.
who don't want a Jewish identity and are trying to undermine it, together with support from Europe and financial support of European governments, etc.,
Yeah.
to take away the Jewish identity. But they failed miserably. You see that in two things. First off, the number of children we have here, even in secular families, the fact that people, first off, do respect the religious. If you take the two major religious times, which is Passover and Yom Kippur,
Hmm.
90% of Israelis observe Yom Kippur. 70% of Israelis not only celebrate Passover, 100% celebrate, or 90% celebrate, but 70% won't eat bread during that,
Right.
out of respect for the religion. But
Right.
more than that, you look at this generation that we have, and I can say that I was a paratrooper. My son followed in my footsteps. He was a paratrooper. The week before the war broke out, he went back for the last week. He finished his service, and I said to my wife before he's going, "So wow, it was so knowing the ceremony. We went from, he was like in the Boy Scouts. We went from one
Hmm.
ceremony to the other. He got his wings, he got his parachute
Right.
wings, got his red beret. And I sort of ridiculed him being a veteran paratrooper. This generation, we did one good thing. We brought them up right. They understand exactly what we're doing. They exactly what we're here for. The religious aspects of their presence. The fact that my son comes back, and the one thing that from all the equipment and things that they got from a lot of, I'm sure also people watching us here who contributed to the Israeli soldiers, the one thing they appreciated the most was the tzitzit that they got.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so these values of this generation, we call them the TikTok generation.
Yes.
They are our greatest generation right now.
Yes.
That Jews for generations will talk about how they were not only for their success in the battlefield, but the conviction and the commitment based on the understanding of who we are, what we're about, and why we're here, and what responsibility they have. And this is those values that we have, and the fact that we bring up our families, understanding who we are and what we're about, and the family values and all these things, I do believe is shared by certain Americans. I
Yes.
believe also a majority of Americans as well. It's a silent majority, as I believe Nixon was the one who referred to that back in the day.
Okay. Again, I'm going to have to put that argument aside about what I think about majorities. But anyway, I do want to, before we wrap up in the
Right.
next 19 hours, ask, just going back to the concept of peace and the potential or lack thereof of a two-state solution.
No,
Um,
no, no, no. I have to
I,
stop you right
I,
now. There is no
I
two-state
know there,
solution is
I know,
finished. That's it. But
okay,
there
I
will
know.
be peace. But there will be peace.
Okay. I know that. I'm saying it tongue in cheek. So, but the point I do want to make though is that we have these three no's, and people need to be asking after 80 years of rejection why the Palestinian Authority is suddenly willing to accept a state. This recognition of de facto statehood, I want to circle back because it's in direct violation of the Oslo Accords. It deliberately circumvents final status negotiations as agreed to by both parties at Oslo. So in my opinion, and I'd like to hear your opinion, why now? I think because the world has promised this, no matter what they say, unconditional statehood. And it's a gift served to Abbas on a silver platter, regardless of these performative demands by feckless world leaders. The PA is going to defy them all, and they're going to have the gift of statehood as a legitimized springboard to accomplish their ultimate goal of annihilating the Jewish state. I don't think this is about recognizing a state for the sake of statehood. I think it's recognizing a state for the sake of finally destroying Israel. Agree or disagree?
Yes, on that premise, of course. I think that the Europeans are trying. I think I talk about this in my latest podcast. But as I said
Yes.
before, Europeans can say whatever they want. They can make whatever. By the way, they were guarantors of the Oslo agreements.
Yes.
So all these countries, again, are violating their commitments, at least the ones they gave to Israel. So they can all go bleep themselves. What
My
is going
premise,
to
though,
happen?
is why the PA is accepting the
Who
state,
cares
is
what they
accepting statehood now.
forget about them. It doesn't matter
Okay.
what they're accepting. They can say whatever they want. It's not going
Okay.
to happen. They can declare, they can live in their imaginary world. What is going to happen is this: Gazans will be relocated out of Gaza. They may leave a certain number there that to be able to have cheap labor for whatever plans they have with this uh, thing
Trump
that they
plan
built. Yeah, this thing they have
near
for
Gaza.
in Judea and Samaria. If the PLO continues with its conduct now, if it doesn't take over, then they'll suffer the same consequence. But it will be probably what will happen is they'll become the responsibility of some Arab country. We'll have to see. So many things can happen. Look, bad things can happen as well. After the fall of Japan and Germany, nobody expected the Soviet Union would be able to take on and move from that to the Cold War. You don't know what else. We can't envision the future. We can try to mold it and shape it and bring it into a direction. And that's what they're going to try to do. We may have, and then for Israel, once we've taken out Hezbollah. We've changed the whole balance of power in Lebanon, whereas the Lebanese, which are basically the Shia and the Christians, the Sunni and the Christians can then create the same arrangement they had before. And the country was very functioning until the Shia moved in and the PLO disrupted the balance there. Syria, you may have a situation also as well. We reached some kind of agreement with them. Just we continue to make sure, and this is one of the things Israel that I like seeing that is happening both with Hezbollah and with Syria. We reached agreements with them. But if they're violating it, we're moving in and taking out the violations. And this is what we have to do with the PLO as well.
Yes.
We have to hold them not only to their commitments, but they pay a price if they violate those commitments. I think it's clear to anybody right now that if Israel wanted to, we could occupy from here all the way to the Euphrates River, which was the original promised land. And we're not doing that because we have no interest in doing that. But we have the capability. So if we're not doing that, get off of us for a while. Look at what the real problems are. Because these problems, everything we're dealing with is coming to you next. This is the essence of what we're dealing with, is what you're going to be dealing with in every European country. They're already dealing with it. It's jihadism. It's jihadists. They'll violate. They won't agree. They won't fulfill to them the only thing that matters. The only thing that they are committed to is Islamic law. Everything else is not acceptable to them. They can say that they can run for mayor, the worst thing that can happen to the United States, and can symbolize to Islam that they won or they've beaten the United States and it's 25 years later, and still for them, it will be a huge victory if they have a Muslim mayor of New York City now. This is not Israel. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has to do with Islam and what Americans, if they understand, this is totally unacceptable. The guy can call himself whatever he wants. He's a jihadist.
Well, isn't it ironic that as the West is deplorably aligning itself more and more with these terrorists and with this jihadists and with these anti-Semites, meanwhile at the UN, the Arab League a couple of weeks ago, I have no sense of time anymore, actually denounced Palestinian terror. Whoever would have imagined, and we're talking more and more about expanding the Abraham Accords, in the irony that the Arab world is moving closer to Israel as the West is moving further from Israel. It leads me to this very, very sincere and confused question. Is this war bringing us any closer to peace?
Yes.
Or further, there's this push and pull.
It will be, because now they understand concessions, weakness in the Middle East does not bring peace. We will not sign peace agreements with them. There'll be economic agreements. With Syria, there will be arrangements around the border. It's not going to be the kind of vision of John Lennon. That's not going to happen here. They'll live together. By the way, you've been to Jerusalem. One of the reasons I love living in Jerusalem, unlike Tel Aviv, everybody looks the same. Everybody is the same. It doesn't matter if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, right-wing, everybody looks the same.
I disagree. You have not been to Tel Aviv in a while. I
try not to go there. Tel Aviv, everybody.
I was there last week. It is a very, very colorful city, but go on.
Yeah, well, anyway, but Jerusalem, you know who the Muslims are, you know who the Christians are. One of the things I love doing with my kids here was going to the old city. Back then, they didn't understand. So I said, yeah, here's the Jewish synagogue. That's the Arab synagogue. That's the Christian synagogue. I would show them these. They understood they were different people. Here in our part, in the Jewish part of Jerusalem, Jews and Arabs live together. We can't go to the Arab parts because they'll be violent against us. That's
Mm-hmm.
totally unacceptable as well. We're going to have to address that.
That's
But
right.
and seriously, physical violence if you by mistake drive into an Arab neighborhood. But in the
Yes.
Jewish neighborhoods, you have Arabs working in the restaurants and the hotels, and the
Right.
guy who does our laundry, he owns a store here. He told me he's a very devout Muslim, and he
Right.
tells me the worst thing that can happen, he says, if we allow the PLO to take over, because says my kids go to the best schools, everything, because I've been living with you. So
Yeah.
we don't love each other here in Jerusalem, but we get along. And the only place in the Middle East where Jews, Muslims, Christians, Baha'is can all live together with a measure of security, all of us,
Yes.
that's Israel.
Yes.
That's where the Jews control things.
People.
So we'll be able to live with these Arab countries. And I think that there'll be a shift in the understanding of things here, and it may eventually come at the expense of the Palestinian cause, which, and by the way, one of the
Yeah.
reasons none of these Arab countries want to take in so-called Palestinians, because every one of them has, if it's Jordan, as I mentioned
That's
before,
right.
Egyptians kept them in refugee camps, wouldn't let them spread around in Egyptian society. The Jordanians did, the Lebanese did. Syrians also had a problem with an uprising of the Palestinians in their society. Iraq, if you remember the first Gulf War,
Yep.
the ones who joined Saddam Hussein were the Palestinians working in the Arab country there, and they expelled them all. So they
Yes.
don't want them as well because they know exactly that that's the problem. So we'll see.
Absolutely. But this also presents a predicament, Daniel, because the fact is Egypt does not want Gaza. Jordan does not want Judea, Samaria, whatever the West Bank parts. And nobody wants to come in and take over these people. So it leaves Israel in this predicament of
No,
an
there's no predicament.
occupation, which we don't want.
There is no occupation. There will be a Jewish control over areas of Judea and Samaria. There'll be an autonomy, just like it happened, just like exists in South Africa for different types of people. There'll be autonomous areas as long as they respect the state of Israel and don't try to pull any of the crap that they did on October 7th. And they'll
Right.
pay the same consequence as the Gazans have,
Yeah.
because they no longer have the backing as the Gaza had, and which they believed it would be the downfall of Israel. So
Yeah.
that's going to change. Things will be much better. I'm not going to say peaceful because you'll always have that element that'll try to disrupt things, but it's not going to be the same. We've moved into the 21st century now.
Yeah.
Everything that happened and all the consequences of the 20th century, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, World War I, World War II, all these things, it's over now.
Yes.
What happens since October 7th is moving at least the Middle East into the 21st century. Whatever happens, we can't anticipate that. They say here in Israel, or the Jewish people say that after the fall of the Second Temple, prophecy was given to fools. So I'm not prophesizing, but I think there's certain things you can expect based on the realities that you see. And certainly what was acceptable, certainly to us until October 7th, that's past century, not anymore.
Okay, I have to ask one more hard-hitting question just because of your experience in how broad it goes from the Prime Minister's office to the IDF and working closely with the press at such high levels. My question is this, and it's not a unique one. Everyone's asking it, but I'm going to ask it in two parts. So the question that everyone's asking, okay, I don't even have to, if you could fill in the blank, but I'll say it because all of our listeners may not know it, which is how can Israel improve its PR? But I also want to ask the
I knew
question.
that was coming.
I know you did, but I want to ask a question that no one is asking. And that is, does it even matter if no one is listening and the press is absolutely unwilling to print what Israel says anyway? Like, I have to be, I'm not going to name a name, but there's a very, very, very famous like Israeli commentator right now who keeps saying that the prime minister does not have an English speaking spokesperson. I'm like, well, there was Elan Levy, and now there's David Menset. Like, what planet are you on? I watch it every day, and he keeps saying it, and I'm like, you're not even listening. How are we going to get the press that's already turned against us to listen? So do you have a thought or a solution based on your experience with the press, or is this a lost cause?
Hmm. We don't have enough time. Um,
We have
but
20 hours.
I can just say this. Back in the day, I
Yes.
was the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Public Diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
And when social media, we first came into action, I think it was 2011, 2012, maybe. Yeah, 2012. In November 2012 was an operation in Gaza. We knew it was coming, so we wanted to prepare to work with the public. I didn't even have Facebook at that time because I believed it was an invasion of privacy. And very long story short, comes down to we had no idea what we were doing. We called on volunteers. We expected to have a few dozen. We ended up having several hundred of this young kids from universities, foreign students who were studying. They all came by, and they saw we had no idea what we were going to do in government, and they took over. And they built the things that we see today, the Instagram, and there wasn't even TikTok at that time. There weren't influencers, but they did these whole things with images and graphics and messages and using platforms. They
Mm-hmm.
were very good. And I spent the first few days just watching what they were doing. And then we got calls from the different universities. And I said to them, talk to the kids. I have no idea what's going on.
Right,
And
right.
I saw, and after this was over, of course, and this was the first time that I had seen that Israel was successful in getting our message out there. And the Arabs were the ones constantly defending themselves and on the defensive and responding. And of course, the government officials all patted themselves on the back. And we had this after the war, the battle was one of these rounds. When it was over, they all sat there and the prime minister came to congratulate us. And everybody saying, yes, we did this and we did that. And I said, and I know Netanyahu many years. I worked with him when I was at the consulate in New York back in the 80s when he was ambassador to the UN. And I said to him, Mr. Netanyahu, I saw a game changer. For the first time in 30 years, things are different and it had nothing to do with us. We can all pat ourselves on the back. This is what I saw. Social media. We have to move to that. And I knew he would pick up very quickly. He has this ability to pick up quickly on things. He told me, give me a plan. I had no idea what to do. I went to talk to these kids. They told me, I eventually asked them, I had the idea. I didn't know how to formulate it. And they gave me the
Yeah.
formula how to do this. And basically the idea was that we take a step back. The government takes a step back. We can give direction. I was thinking of doing this with students who they work on behalf of it. They're on social media anyway. One of our
Mm-hmm.
problems was we only get on board things when there's a crisis. So they're always there. So we can give them, I don't know, a scholarship that
Mm-hmm.
when we need them to, and we can, and this is what people will know. They're working on behalf of Israel. There's nothing wrong with that. Listen, the Saudis and especially the Qataris have been doing that for years. Now we're at a disadvantage because let's say 15% are on our side, 25, maybe 30 today more, 35% on their side. Most people don't know what's really going on. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to focus on them. And my idea was that government step back, give direction on things that need to be addressed, but let the public take on. And they're doing a little of that today. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
eventually work out. I understood they wouldn't let that happen. That was one of the reasons I left. Um, so there were a lot of difficulties with doing that, but also government can't do. That's why I wanted the public, because I saw what happened those few days. They were able to get PR companies on board that volunteered their time, and everybody, all these Israelis, and
Mm-hmm.
you get different stories from people who connect to people on the left and people who connect, and Israeli Arabs were joining in, and you had different populations, so you could they work automatically. You don't even have to direct them. So I just thought that because you have many different elements involved. You have stand with us. They don't always agree. So the government is the one who can say, hey, why don't you focus on this or that, or this is a good idea, that's a good idea. But let it run on its own. They
Yeah.
didn't, that government can never do that. It's not going to happen. Um, I don't really think it matters. Work with media is important to a degree, but media today is so not what it was supposed to be. It so violated the principles of journalism
Mm-hmm.
that it's not only a waste of time. You have very few journalists that uphold the principles of journalism. You have a lot more influencers on different social media outlets who do a much better job at getting the truth and getting the, so you can work with them. But I think more than anything, what Israel has to do is what I just said to you before. Um, we have to, because look, I was talking to a group of very affluential Jewish people this week. And they said, we have to get more and more of the images of October 7th out there. People don't know, they don't remember, they don't. I said, yes, and we'll get that. And we do that. And people will see that. It's not like they didn't see it on October 7th itself.
Right.
But people, they go back to their lives. They really don't care. And it's not only about us. They don't care about anybody. If something becomes a political thing that you can be sanctimonious about, and that's what they're doing with Gazans right now, but there's far more hunger in African countries. There's far more abuse of children. There's child labor. There's child, what do you call it, sexual harassment of children, and children are being abducted. Nobody cares about that stuff. People may bother them. What are they actually doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
There are no planes flying and dropping food or helping them, and no militaries going in to assist them.
Right.
So people will be sympathetic to you for a while, but it's not going to last. What you need to do is make people understand how things apply to them. And I did this with you previously when I said, we're the first line of defense. What we're facing here, what we're dealing with here, they already are dealing with it within Europe. The failure of the state of Israel was very much what is happening is the denial, is the not holding them, is happening in Europe. When they're denying what is they're facing with the Muslims who have moved into their societies. When they're not only forgiving, but excusing this and holding themselves to higher standards than these people who want to be, that they claim to want to be absorbed in their societies, when they're making excuses and assisting them and not holding them to the values of our societies. For us, it erupted on October 7th. For you, it's going to happen as well. These people are telling you what they want to do. They're not hiding it. They told us, and they say it today. We're listening to them now. We won't have one October 7th, not 10 October 7th, not 100, not 1,000, 10,000 October 7th, given the opportunity. And when they talk about, and I mentioned this before, globalizing the Intifada, Intifada is violence. Who are they going to globalize it for in the streets of London or in Paris or in Switzerland or in the United States or in New York City for that matter? They're already doing it. And they're going to apply Sharia law in different places. They're already invaded you. And that's why what we're going through, if we don't succeed here, and if you don't watch what is going and who we're dealing with, you're going to end up having the same kind of things. And they already have some of these things. Murders are happening because October 7th wasn't the only case. We had small terrorists, you had families massacred, you had women raped, you had children that were butchered before October 7th, but it was small scale.
Yep.
You already have that in Europe. You have this major incident right now in Scotland where two young girls,
Right.
you've seen that, where
Yes.
there was attempted rape of one of them. She came out, and
With
instead
a
of
hatchet and
yes, and instead of supporting her, you don't have to support that, but understanding why she did it.
Mm-hmm.
They're making excuses for the piece of shit who wanted to attack these young girls.
Yeah.
So it's happening, and that's why I say we have to make people understand how what is happening here applies to them.
And by the way, that is actually why we need separate states. Israel cannot absorb a large and growing Arab population that, even by demographics, could take over the Jewish state and take away the Jewish nature of Israel.
No. This is another one of, sorry to interrupt you. This is another one of the one of the things that we were said, we have to separate the two states because the Jewish population today outnumbers inside the state of Israel.
It does today.
Yes. And there's more Jews being born today than Arabs, because once they become more part of the society here and they're held to the same, there are people who are trying to say now that, and there's the Islamic movement in Israel, the Muslim Brotherhood, different elements of it that are trying to create a situation where all their violations of our laws are overlooked. And the courts here, unfortunately, cooperate with that. But for the years in which they had to abide and were held to the same standards as all citizens of the state of Israel, then they were able to live together here. By the way, in the government press office, the best worker I had and the one I trusted the most in my work with the media was a Christian Arab from Lod. And to this day, we're good friends because she was an Israeli like I am. So I doubt that they'll, yeah, sorry.
My argument isn't against Arabs. It's against absorbing like the 2 million in Gaza or I mean, 70% of the Arabs in the West Bank support Hamas as well. And you take in these millions of extra, and I'm talking about radicalized. I'm not talking about Arabs in general. I'm
Right.
not even talking about Muslims in general. But what's happening in America, these convulsing masses, we have fewer Muslims in America than we do Jews. Like, swallow that concept. This is, we're talking about a very, 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 very small percentage. And it doesn't take a lot to hit that tipping point. And I think that
No, but
one of the most,
here other
yeah.
things come into effect, and that's what Qatar has done. And Qatar are the funders of the Muslim Brotherhood. The person behind the Muslim Brotherhood and support for it is the mother of the Emir of Qatar, and she is
Yes.
very much in spreading Islam. And it's not even extreme Islam;
Mm-hmm.
Islam is its at its root, and they use the billions of dollars annually with influencers, with media, with universities. It's been
Mm-hmm.
for 40 years been going on very quietly behind the scenes, and you're seeing the results of that now. So it's not only the numbers, it's what they're supported behind. And if they don't start holding them, look, this week Australia kicked out the ambassador
Iranian. Uh-huh.
of Iran because Israel brought to their attention what is going on. They didn't want to believe us initially, and suddenly they're caught with that. Now the European countries, Germany has already moved back out of the support for Palestinian State, and they're going to continue the boycott with Iran. So they're starting
Yeah.
to see that some of the things, the stupidity of what they were doing. So there's still hope for things, and unfortunately, it comes with it will be with a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah. I appreciate your optimism. I'm going to leave it at that. Listen, it's midnight there. My goodness, you
Yes.
have been.
My wife wants to go to sleep.
Okay, I have to ask one last question: is what
Yes.
does Israel Chai mean to you?
Wow, what does it mean? It's already what we're seeing now. And if I became, I don't, when I see things, I tend to accept it. And what you see here in Israel, and I think I first became aware of it on, I said my son's birthday is on the 2nd of September. And a month later, it's my youngest. And a month later, we got from the municipality of Jerusalem little clough. What do you say? How do you call it? I'm getting tired. A card that they planted trees in the name of our son in the Jerusalem forest. But there was a quote there from Zechariah, and the quote said that it'll come the day when the elderly will again sit in the streets of Jerusalem, and the children will play before them. And that's nice, and it's the visions of the restoration. And that was received on the week of Sukkot. And there's on in here in Jerusalem on Bethlehem Street, there's a carnival during Sukkot.
Purim? Oh, Sukkot.
No, Sukkot. There's a
Yeah.
carnival in the streets, and I'm walking there a day or two after I got this thing from the municipality, and I'm seeing the old people sitting there, and the children are playing before them. And here's the vision and the promise of the prophets, and the prophecies are happening. And if my grandfather, over 100 years ago, after hearing in Afghanistan that the Jews were returning and the restoration has begun, they went from Afghanistan, it took them a year to get here. It was 1918. They saw that it was indeed happening, went back, took the entire family, went back a year, and then took them another year to get there. 1920, 21, they arrived back in Jerusalem and decided. So I'm saying if they found that and they believed what the prophets were saying, who am I? That we have it so easy here, and we have it, and we are. Am Yisrael Chai is back and strong, and the way it was prophesied to be again. And I look at our children now, and how they are the next generation and what they're going to bring. And I believe may not be the immediate election, but we'll start seeing this generation influence the state of Israel. Maybe not now, but perhaps just like in Yom Kippur after the war, it took 3 years before Menachem Begin was elected. Same thing will happen here. 3-4 years, you'll have another elections, and this generation will start influencing the greater future of the state of Israel and of the Jewish people.
Amen. May the greatest generation continue to build the greatest state.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for the generosity of your time, your knowledge, your wisdom. Thank you for your service to the nation. And as they say in the old country, Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you. Am Yisrael Chai and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.